Lesotho. It's a country within a country. The nation whose borders it sits within is South Africa, which historically certainly had its issues with its neighbours, and before this it was a part of the British Empire, which liked nice neat borders and wasn't afraid to force its desired changes on its colonies. And so, given its neighbourhood, its history, and the fact that it's entirely located within another country, this raises a question. Why does Lesotho exist, and how did it manage to stay independent? So, like many things throughout history, Lesotho can be traced back to Napoleon. As a result of Napoleon being Napoleon, he incorporated the Netherlands into France and by extension took its colonies for his own. The British, firm enemies of the French that they were, saw an opportunity to liberate these colonies and keep them out of French hands. The idea was that these would be handed back to the Dutch after Napoleon's defeat and the resumption of their independence. And by handed back, I mean only the ones that the British didn't want for themselves. The most notable colony that Britain kept was Cape Colony here in southern Africa, and the way that the British ran its new territory upset the European settlers who already lived there. They promptly left and settled here, which brought them into contact with the Lesotho people here. There were a few wars over the most fertile land in the region because starvation sucked, and the Lesotho came off the worst. Fearing more losses to the Boers, the Lesotho king Moshoeshoe asked the British for protection in 1865, which they accepted. Now, the British believed that by asking for protection, Moshoeshoe was surrendering all of his country's sovereignty to Britain forever, but that's not how he saw it. 6 years after providing protection, Britain decided that things needed to change. First, the Lesotho weren't allowed to own guns anymore because that would mean that they'd be able to shoot back during rebellions, which wasn't cool. And second, Lesotho land was to stop existing and was to be incorporated into Cape Colony. And third, it would be settled. At first, they accepted some of this, but it wasn't too long until direct rule was stifling, and so, rebellion. Britain was unable to suppress this rebellion quickly, and doing so would require a lot more men and a lot more money. As such, Plan B, concede. And thus Lesotho land returned to its former status as a British protectorate separate from Cape Colony. And after this, there was no change until the 1960s. This was the point where the British Empire really started to fall apart, and Lesotho land gained its independence in 1966 and it became the Kingdom of Lesotho. It was proclaimed a parliamentary democracy with the Lesotho National Party in charge, and this democratic streak would last until the next election, when the opposition won, and so it was time for a coup. This kept Prime Minister Leopold Jonathan in charge, with the difficult time of dealing with his only neighbour, apartheid South Africa. Lesotho was economically reliant on them, which is why it was never annexed. The Praetorian government knew that it could economically hurt Lesotho whenever it wanted. And despite Jonathan's support for the ANC and other South African rebel groups, outright annexation wasn't feasible. A direct invasion would have seen major international condemnation, and the domestic situation in South Africa meant that adding hundreds of thousands more people who hated the government was not a good idea. That said, the Praetorian government aided a coup against Jonathan's government in 1986 and replaced him with a much friendlier leader, who, as apartheid collapsed, was himself thrown out of power and relations normalized. And thus, after this, the last threats to Lesotho's existence were over.